Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Remote Real Estate Investor. I'm Michael Albaum, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Antonia. She is a project manager extraordinaire, licensed architect in numerous states, and then the owner of Mad Project. And she's going to be talking to us today about when you should think about hiring a project manager, what are some of the do's and don't do's, and also what it's like to be a woman running her own business in the construction space. So without further ado, let's get into it. Antonia the Conqueror, project manager extraordinaire, licensed architect in multiple states, and owner of Mad Project. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with us. So you are a jack of all trades. You do a lot of different stuff. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a project manager. But before we get into that, can you share with everybody what the best way to get a hold of you is, or a hold of your company, Mad Project? If after listening to this episode, they're like, Antonia's a beast, she's a rock star, I want to use her as my project manager.
Sure, absolutely. So my website is great. It's a great way to get a hold of me. There's a little contact me form in there that I watch very closely. So madproject.com, and you can scroll down, contact me. Also, there's a great newsletter that I write about once a month. So if you want to get it, you can hear from me that way. And additionally, I'm very active on Twitter. And I will give you my handle and you can share it in the notes as well. But that's a really easy way to contact me. And worst case, if you really just want to get to me, it's Antonia at madproject.com with a double D. So that's
perfect.
Always. I'm very easy to get a hold of.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on and sharing that with everybody. What I want to talk about today is what it's like to be a project manager. What are some of the things that a project manager does? And then what are some of the hurdles that you've seen people really stumble over when doing rehab or renovation projects where maybe they should have gotten a project manager?
Sure, absolutely. So typically on development projects, there's one person who serves as a point of contact for the owner, who helps coordinate the design team, helps to oversee the permitting process, and ultimately oversees or helps to oversee the construction manager during a construction process. So generally, when you have larger projects, you should expect to have a project manager, somebody either in-house with the developer or a third party like my company, that their job is just to make sure that the project is going in the right direction, that you're accomplishing through design all the different goals that are set forth in the pro forma. So that's generally what a project manager does.
Okay. I guess what would be the scale or the scope of a project that you would feel a project manager would be justified in coming on? Because a lot of our listeners will do cosmetic rehab, update flooring, kitchen, bathroom, that kind of thing. And they might be thinking to themselves, oh, shoot, do I need a project manager for that? What would you say is kind of the defining scope or cost?
So, it really depends on what you want the project manager to do. If it's something where you just need a little bit of help on strategy, that's one way. If you need comprehensive project management because you've got no idea what you're doing, by way either of, it's a new type of project that you've never done before, or you've never done any kind of design or construction before, you don't know how to hire an architect. It's really more about the resources that you have available and less about the size of the project itself. I think that's more the thing that I would say pushes you to have a project manager.
Okay. No, I love that. What about, let me give you a scenario, because I think this would be a lot of our listeners fall into this category, and I'm curious to get your take on project management versus non-project management. So I'd say 95, maybe 98% of our investors or listeners are remote investors. And oftentimes they are newer investors. And so if they wanted to take on a project that involves some significant rehab of a house, maybe changing some bedrooms around, changing the footprint of the property, and then some cosmetic stuff, and they don't have any experience and they're remote, is that something you think they'd be justified in hiring a property manager to help facilitate and coordinate?
I mean, I definitely think that there could be a lot of value if they're thinking of doing it again at some point, because there's a lot of things that you can standardize. For example, like let's say you know that you like a certain tile in the kitchen, you know that you want your bedrooms to be a certain size. And instead of having to go through the process, learning the lessons the hard way, you could have a more strategic sort of session with, we do hourly consults or 30-minute consults where we could talk about some of those strategies. We could talk about some of the things that you could standardize. So I think perhaps not hiring someone full on, but at minimum having some sort of conversations with somebody, either be it the architect that you end up hiring for the project, because you're going to need one if you're doing something like that, or the contractor that you hire for it. I think having some general strategy of, hey, like, what are the things that we're going to have to do? What's the permit like? How long do those things take? And then ultimately going back and saying, hey, we want to do this again. Let's make a list of all the things that we learned in terms of, how long permits actually took. What finishes we do end up liking that were very easy to get during construction. They were easily available at the local store, and sort of really find a way to like take the lessons and actually use them, right? Because a lot of the problem that people have is that, let's say you do it once and you're going to make mistakes and that's okay. But if this is the fifth time you're doing it and you still don't know, like, how to pick tile, I mean, like, what are you doing? Right.
What are you doing? Yeah.
So, I would really say sort of sit down for a minute and think a little bit about strategy and about like, and then as you go through the process, write down some of the lessons so that you can refer back to them, and really have a better go around the second, third, fifth time.
I love that. And I think it makes so much sense. And I mean, I love too that Mad Project does these half-hour hourly consults, because so many people don't know what they don't know. And so don't even know what questions to ask of their property manager or contractor who they're working with. So I think a strategy session could be so valuable. I know you and I have talked about my development project, and I wish we had sat down for numerous strategy sessions before taking on that project, but too little, too late. That this is the learning lesson on the job. So what about in terms of driving timing? Is that something that a project manager should be expected to do or could be expected to do? If I'm a remote investor and contractor says, hey, it'll take a month, I hire a project manager and said, okay, make sure they're getting this stuff done because I'm remote. Is that something that you're all able to help out with?
Absolutely. So there's a couple different ways that a project manager should be doing that. And again, it also depends on the size of the project. If you're, for example, in your example where you're saying, okay, it's for remote investors, the project manager should have a couple different points of contact with the team that is actually on the ground, whether the project manager is also remote or not. There should be at least a weekly meeting during construction. And that in that weekly meeting, you should be discussing things like, hey, like, did the inspector come this week? Are we going to run out of the tile that I really like that I know has like a 2-week lead time, and so we really need to anticipate it? Hey, are you actually on schedule? And if you're not on schedule, why aren't you on schedule? Oh, because the plumber didn't show up. Why didn't he show up? Did you not pay him? Or is it because, his guy last minute had a family thing and couldn't come on Tuesday? So it's really having those touch points and having them constantly. Like, you can't say, oh, we're going to have weekly meetings, and then by the third one, people lose steam or kind of feel like, oh, well, we've had the last 2 weeks. We don't really need to continue having them. That's absolutely the wrong thing to do. You want to have constant touch points. You want to make sure that you're, all the time paying attention to what's going on, particularly on those remote projects where if you're doing like a single family rehab, they go really quick. So you want to make sure that you're hearing the problems every week. The contractor, a lot of these contractors can have a question and they can forget to ask you for 4 weeks. And then, they stopped work because they didn't have an answer to a question that they forgot to ask you. So, a project manager can absolutely help to do one, make sure that you're having the meetings. And number two, you can, in your agreement with your project manager, you can ensure that they are walking the site at least, every 2 weeks. So there's really a lot of things that you can do. The project manager, you can also have these periodic meetings with the different parties. So you don't necessarily have to have the meeting with everybody. You can have, I highly encourage having like an all hands meeting once a week for like a single family rehab. But you can also make sure that like Tuesday mornings you call the architect and you just kind of chit chat. You're like, hey, how's it going? Like, hey, what are you up to? Because those are the times when you get like the dirt, right? Like, hey, I went out there and like that green that you chose for that wall is hideous. The contractor's not going to tell you. They're like, oh yeah, I painted the wall.
Right. And I got paid for it.
They're not going to say, hey, I got paid for it. I painted the wall. And you come visit from out of town and you look at it and you're like, oh my God, like who thought this was a good idea? Right. So those are the things you want to avoid. Yeah. And the way that you avoid them is by keeping that contact. And again, once you're a remote investor and you've done this a few times, honestly, these are things that once you kind of get the hang of them, you don't need to hire someone else to do them. You can do them yourself. If you have a good strategy and a good framework to begin to do them. And then you got to have the discipline, right? So having a project manager a lot of times in a project is like having like a coach. It's the person who's saying like, hey, you need to pay this invoice. Hey, you need to sign this contract. Hey, you need to make this decision. Hey, like I need you to go down to the city and sign this document. Like normally having that extra discipline helps a lot in the projects and they help to drive the schedule. So all of these things and having that constant coaching and sort of follow up is absolutely the role of a project manager. And it is the thing that really keeps the schedule, which, as we know, in development, schedule's king. And that doesn't matter what size project you have.
Yep. Anyone who's watching the YouTube version of this will have noticed that I was smiling, grinning ear to ear when Antonia was talking about the plumber, because like literally that's what happened. My GC said, oh, the plumber didn't show up and he got family stuff. It's like, oh, are you serious? Are you kidding me right now? So that kind of stuff happens.
But it's also important to know that the guy didn't show up because he had a kid's soccer game that he forgot about versus, hey, he didn't show up because a contractor didn't pay him. And then you're like, wait, I paid you, so why didn't you pay the guy? So, and the more, the quicker you figure that out, the better, because you don't want to be having that conversation when you're like 2 weeks away from supposedly being done. And then it turns out that, your contractor, your CM has not been paying your subs for the last, 4 weeks. And you come to find out that you have a lien on your house.
Right.
So, in that sense, like, that's also why it's important, because you can avoid these major sort of problems if you're able to catch them as they're happening.
Love it. Love it. So that's, I think, a really great summation of what project managers do. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe what clients have expected of you in the past, but you said, like this really is outside the role and scope of a project manager? I mean, what should people expect to have done by other people or to do themselves?
Oh boy.
And feel free to go crazy with this one.
We've run into some funny situations. I've built furniture on site. I've brought people coffee.
Wow.
I've been on site overnight on installs of big jobs. Within the bounds of professional reasonableness, we basically do everything. And I that's a big, caveat that I put at the beginning of that: reasonable professionalism.
Right. Which is so shades of gray in that statement.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then every now and then, for me on the bigger, super complex projects where, you have sort of a syndicate or a different group of investors coming in to co-GP a project. This is for like the really big stuff. I will sit in a lot of investor meetings just because very often investors will ask, the sponsor, hey, how are you going to build this? What do these things cost? What's your schedule? Like, what's your team like? Like, who's actually going to be in site? How are you going to review pay applications? All these things. And, I'm the one answering those questions on behalf of the sponsor or the person who hires me. So there's a little bit, that goes into that. We also do a lot of feasibility at the beginning of a project. Many times people will come to us to say, hey, we went down the road of designing this entire project and it doesn't pencil. And it turns out that it's a terrible idea to build a high-rise building in this neighborhood. What do we do? And so I'll actually, I'll put my architect, urban designer hat on and I will redesign the entire building. So, it's been crazy. And I think the last year pandemic, kind of gave people a little bit of a reason to pause and to rethink a lot of these things. And so I actually ended up with almost every single project that has come through in the last 18 months, I have redesigned at the request of the owner. That they said, hey, look, like whatever we have isn't really working. What do you think we should do? Like, how do we start project management on this? And I'm like, hey guys, let's take a step back, redo feasibility and make it work. So we'll do a lot of that. So we go from, we are a little bit involved in those investor conversations because they often have questions that we are equipped to answer. We're also involved in feasibility. I'd rather be involved in projects that don't need to have the ship turned around. I'd rather just be involved from the beginning, but it is what it is. And then
it is what it is.
Yeah. And then finally, we are obviously the on-site day-to-day stuff, design decisions, technical, mechanical, electrical, plumbing decisions regarding ownership preference and what's really going to be the best way to go with systems. All of that stuff, obviously that's the more traditional stuff that you'd expect to see. And where we are a little bit less traditional is on the design and is on that sort of investor facing stuff. Every now and then I'm asked to be a part of potential investor conversations. And if for whatever reason the situation is a little murky or there's a lot of kind of unanswered things, like, it's a dance, right? You want to make sure that you're helpful and that you're there. But at the end of the day, I am not the owner of the project. And so I have to be very careful, not only from like a deal perspective. Like I don't want to say anything that's going to tank your deal. That's, that doesn't help anybody. But at the same time,
right.
Like I am a registered architect. I do carry professional liability and I am very aware of it. And so, my agreements with all my clients explicitly says that on the project involved, I have no professional standing. I am not the architect of the project. And sometimes there's conversations or moments with building departments or things like that where I have to really be disciplined about my role on the project and the fact that I'm not a professional with professional standing on this project. So that's kind of the general where we draw the boundaries. And then there's the stuff that is not professional. So we deal with some of that too, but that's probably,
It sounds like we could probably do a whole episode on that.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. For sure.
So I'm curious, Antonia, why in the last 18 months have you had to redesign all the project? I mean, what have you changed? What have you seen changed in the last 18 months?
Well, I mean, I think a little bit, some project types got a little bit of a break naturally, like hospitality did. One of my projects is student housing, and they had a little bit of a break related to financing too. Banks were not running to finance these projects. And so,
Right.
These owners took the time to say, hey, you know what, maybe there's a better way. And there's a way where we can make this a little bit more efficient, a little bit more appropriate. And so they took the time to do it just because, again, they had a natural break related to the fact that, no capital was looking out to put money into student housing or hospitality projects. I mean, hospitality was pretty hard hit. So there was definitely a lot of redesigning hotel ideas in these last 18 months.
Okay. And redesign in the sense that it's no longer a hotel, or redesign from the perspective of we're just going to do it a little bit differently than it was done more traditionally in the past?
Two different types of projects that I've redesigned. Predominantly student housing has been, one of the types that I've redesigned. And then the other one was hospitality. In the case of the hospitality project, it had a condo component to it. It has a condo component to it. The mix was changed a little bit. The sizes of the units were changed a little bit. The amenities were changed a little bit. ultimately, I mean, so this is for an existing building that has this massive renovation going on. So it was really kind of with what you had and how far they had already gone into construction, because that building's already in construction. The interior renovation was already underway, basically. They were basically looking to make it a little bit more attractive, now understanding that COVID had happened and how the pandemic had changed the way that people use space, particularly public space. Mm-hmm. So that was what the hotel sort of redesigned. It's still a hotel. That building is probably always going to be a hotel. It's very significant. And so we didn't change the use completely. On the case of the student housing, for example, there was a little bit more of wanting to make the construction a little bit more efficient. And so really looking at the massing and how much of the structure was wood, how much of the structure was concrete, whether it was more or less expensive to build as a podium versus a wrap, if we were going to go above 4 floors, and if we did, what that meant for the construction type. And so having these sort of technical conversations completely changed the massing of the building.
Interesting.
Like altogether. It was a completely different building, completely different size. And then it again, prompted a lot of conversations about public space, because this building is the size of a city block.
Whoa.
And so, you had a lot of like that deep in between space. So it's like, well, how do we create courtyards? Originally they had a massive courtyard, and we said, hey, look, really big courtyards are usually very uncomfortable spaces. And so why aren't we a little more thoughtful about how we divide this space, and what can we do in those courtyards to program them and make the whole project just better? That's sort of the flavor and the reasoning why we would redesign projects. So
that makes total sense. How neat. That's really cool.
It's pretty cool. I enjoy that a lot, because one of the things that I don't talk a lot about on Twitter, for example, is that I am actually an urban designer. I do have a graduate degree in urban design, and I like, the idea of the whole building. How does that building affect the environment around it? How do you approach it? How does it, address the street? What's the human scale of it? Where are the amenities? Where do you see them from? What's the good corner? What's the corner you want to avoid? All of these sort of urban questions really come into play when we do these building redesigns. Where are you going to get a lot of shade in the courtyard? Where are you, is that going to be an uncomfortable place to hang out? So that's pretty cool for me to get the chance to do that.
Yeah.
It's like being an architect without the hassle of being an architect.
Right. Only the good parts.
Exactly.
So it sounds like there isn't a whole lot that you don't do. And that's for sure like a double, triple negative sentence, but that's okay.
Something like that. Yeah. I mean, within the reasonable ask, there's, and every now and then we're finding new things that people approach us for, one thing that also became a little bit interesting was I had a couple family offices reach out during pandemic to say, hey, we have this project going on, or we're going to invest money into this project that's kind of starting soon. We want you to look at the people who are going to build it and let us know if you think they can pull it off. And to me, that was a little bit surprising. But I had more than one request like that. So that kind of thoughtfulness really on the investor side and a little bit adding a little more sophistication, a little bit more data to people who aren't used to having that data or have the background to make those decisions has been really interesting.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Just a little quick word to the wise for the folks that are doing that hotel redesign. Tell them not to have 2 fires during the course of construction. It'll really screw things up for them. Take it from me.
Yes, I will make sure. We should add that to the list of things to watch out for. Fire.
Oh, that's great. So tell me, when someone is going out and looking to hire a project manager or have a consult with a project manager, bring them into the fold, first off, what should they be looking for? What should some of the interview questions they speak to them about? And then you mentioned remote versus not remote could or could not be an issue. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So one of the things that you want to find out from a project manager is you really want to understand the scope of services that they provide. Not, unlike some of the professional disciplines that are related to development, project management is not really regulated in any way. So different people do different things, and it really depends on their background. So you can get some project managers who are very strong during the construction process that will absolutely have no idea how to lead a design team. So, and not to their fault in any way, they will advertise that, hey, I'll take it from the moment that you have construction documents and you have permits and you have financing, I'm good. But before that, like, I can't help you. So make sure that has been spoken about. Like, if you need somebody to lead your design team, in the instances of small projects, if you have a really good architect, they should be able to project manage the whole design aspect of it. But you want to make sure that you're on the same page regarding what you need, right? So if you need somebody to help you figure out pay applications, and if you want to carry your own ACR, or that's an anticipated cost report, which I highly recommend for big projects, you need to have the conversation with the project manager that they will do that. Even project managers that are really strong in construction will not carry an anticipated cost report for you. A lot of times that falls on the finance side. And it's a little bit disjointed and difficult to do, because if you've never done one before and if you're not familiar with construction, it's really difficult to anticipate things like change orders, so there's very little anticipated in your anticipated cost report if you can't have any foresight because you have no technical understanding of what you're doing. So again, being super upfront and clear about the things that you need. Having said that, every now and then I will have clients reach out, or potential clients reach out and say, you know what, Antonia, I need help on this project and I have absolutely no idea what I need. And that's fair. And being that upfront and honest about it is a great starting point, because then the project manager or the potential project manager can say, okay, tell me your situation and we can tell you what services we offer and where we think we can fill in the gaps. And a really, really good one will say, hey, you know what? These are things that I don't do. And either I can recommend someone to do them, or this is how we should handle them. So again, it's just being upfront about what you need, and really being comfortable with that person's experience and connections in the industry, because that's really important too. And making sure that they're gonna be able to pull it off, and someone that you respect and you trust, right? That you trust their experience. I would also recommend asking for references.
Yep.
I always have about 8 people that I keep in mind for references, and the reason I do that is because my contact with them has been super varied. Some people are people that I've worked for. Some people are people that have worked for me. Others are contractors I've worked with. Others are architects I've worked with. And so depending on the type of project that I'm sort of going for, and if the potential client says, hey, I need references, I'll tailor my references to be adequate for what they're going to be building so that they're appropriate and relevant. So always ask for references, you just want to be comfortable with the person. You're going to spend a lot of time with this person. You want to make sure that you can communicate well with them, that you can be candid with them. It's sort of like the lawyer kind of thing. Like, you want to make sure that you're comfortable telling them everything that's relevant, because if this person is supposed to represent you and they only have half the information, you also have to trust them that they're not going to share some stuff that you don't want to share with people at the wrong time. So it's all of these things, that I would really watch out for on how to pick a project manager. That's
great. And then remote versus local, remote to the project, local to the project. Yeah. What are your thoughts there?
So, now, and especially, again, same thing with the last 18 months have been really interesting, because for a long time, a lot of people were very adamant about, if you're going to manage this project, you have to be there. And I've found that not necessarily to be true, because for several years ahead of 2020, I had been managing projects remote just as a result of the kind of work that I was doing. I was doing a lot of hospitality work nationally. And so we lived on a plane, and the rest of the time you were managing it remotely. And we had very specific systems that we had set up. So, that's a big part of it, is if you're going to go with someone remote, make sure they have strong systems to manage it. and you want to put in that agreement that, hey, you need to be there once a month, you need to have that in your agreement and in your understanding, and you need to talk about how often you're going to need them to be there. Having said that, it really depends on the project, and it really depends on the investor and as what you're comfortable. A lot of banks will require to walk your site once a month. And so you want to make sure that to put that into the agreement. There's two minds about it. On one end, I will tell you there's nothing like having someone on site all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I will tell you that I've only ever done one project where I had to be there every day. And it was extremely complicated. It had a massive historic preservation component to it. It had crazy MEP coordination for, kitchens, commercial kitchens. It was a large urban project. It was 6 acres. There was a lot to it that was like every day it was wild, and just very few projects fit that bill. So, you can have that, you can request that, but be willing to pay for it, right? So that's also a consideration. If you want somebody there every day, if you want someone there once a week or once a month, it's going to have a different price point. And so you have to also be really honest. A good project manager will be able to tell you, like, hey, you don't need me there every day. You do need eyes on your project, especially while it's under construction.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But, now managing design, I have teams right now that are, let's say my average team is like 15 people, like project team. And out of those 15 people, you can have them be in like 6 different states.
Wow.
And like, that's normal right now.
Wow.
So
Wow.
That's
really cool. And it really opens up the availability for project managers of who you can select. That's great.
For sure. And you know what? It also allows you to start hiring design firms that are more appropriate for projects. And a lot of times people were like, well, I want to hire a local architect. And you went to go talk to the guy and you were doing a student housing project, but the guy had never done student housing or multifamily for that matter, but he had done, let's say, commercial spaces. And that was kind of the closest local guy you're going to find. Now you can hire the best student housing architect in the country and still feel fairly confident that they're going to be able to figure out what's appropriate for your project and work in whatever jurisdiction you're in. So that's also a great advantage to owners, I think, to really open up that pool to get better resources for their projects. There's no excuse anymore, basically.
There's no excuse for sucking.
There's no excuse for hiring a crappy team.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good to keep in mind. And you touched on it, and I definitely want to come back to it. So I think what's probably on a lot of people's mind is cost. What is a typical, is there such a thing as a typical cost structure, and what should people expect to pay for project management services?
Sure. So, for interior renovations, let's say, that are under $5 million, which is kind of your typical hospitality renovation for, the branded hotels and even the boutique stuff to a certain size, you're looking at, $5 million and under. Typically, those project managers will charge a percentage of the full project cost. And that doesn't include only construction. It also includes your soft costs. So managing your design team, going through the process of hiring the architect, everything, they'll manage. It's like turnkey, if you will. Those people will charge somewhere between 5 and 6% of the overall. And I don't agree with that general structure. That's not how Mad Project works. So we're fee based, right? So we'll give you a fee. That's the fee monthly for the duration of the project. Except during construction, depending on the larger projects, we actually switch our style a little bit during construction. I put more resources on that. And so that's when it's a little bit more, but not so much more that you're like, whoa, it doesn't double. So on those smaller projects, you'll see like a 5 to 6%. That's typically what you'll also see in ultra luxury single family. Ultra luxury, I'm talking about houses that are over maybe $4 million or so, where you absolutely need a project manager. Some of these buildings are so complicated. between crazy structures, insane like audio systems, really expensive materials where if you cut that marble wrong, it's like a $70,000 mistake. Wow. Yeah. So in those instances, that's what I would say that's kind of market. So that's what you should expect to see. On the larger projects, and you're going to realize that there's a gap here, and we could try to address the gap. So on larger projects, let's say $30 million and over, particularly if it's ground up, what you'll usually see reps charge is 2 to 3%. And again, on large projects, I don't think that that's the right way to bill a project. There's things that I think it sets up the wrong incentives, so if your construction costs more, then you pay me more. I don't know. That just doesn't seem right.
Right.
And then, and then sometimes there's instances where and this rarely happens, but when it does, and this year was a good example of it, ownership decides to redesign the building, and now you're doing an extra year of work, not necessarily for any extra fee. And when you are a smaller consulting company, that can really hit you. So that also hedges for that. I am how much I am per month until we reach construction, period. And if you guys decide to put a pause on it to go do some exercise and you want me involved in it, you know how much it's going to cost you. And so the benefit with having the fee-based option or the fee-based billing that we do is how much we're going to cost from day one. You can anticipate those costs on day one, whereas a lot of project managers or project management companies, you don't really know how much they're going to cost you. I mean, you think you do, but you actually don't.
Because your costs change throughout the project. So it's a really tough situation, and it just always creates all kinds of funny situations with people, and you end up having conversations that are not related to moving the project forward. So, and then there's that gap, right? So what happens to projects that are, let's say, ground up $10 million? My thought is if you're in that position and you're a developer, it is very likely that you didn't just wake up and get there. You kind of had a process of getting there. I would hope so.
Right. And so in those instances, and I've had people like that reach out, I will tell them, I will say, hey, look, this is how much I am, because it's no less work from a project management standpoint than a $30 million project. The difference is obviously the fee and the fee that the sponsor will charge investors for management. And so given that the management fee is going to be a lot less, most of the time I will say, hey, why don't we set up a retainer that is not comprehensive project management. I have that going on right now with one company, and it works fairly well with them. I mean, they call me when they have a question, they call me for strategy, but I don't actually manage the day-to-day. And it works really well. So on those, I just tell them hey, you know what? You're perfectly capable of managing this yourself. And if you have questions, you can call me. And I have those relationships where I don't mind being on the phone for an hour here and there and growing those relationships so that when they do have the $100 million deal and then they're like, hey, we're ready to have a really crazy project and we really need you, then I'll be, we know that we work together well and it works out. So that's kind of the super long answer to your question of how much a project manager should charge. But
I love
it varies. And you have to watch it, to be honest. There's some shenanigans in there. So just,
like anything, there's something a little shenanigans. Awesome. Well, I want to start wrapping up here, Antonia, and curious to get your thoughts. And if you could speak to kind of what it's like to be a woman in the space and any recommendations you have for women investors out there that are trying to do some projects in a space that's been traditionally male dominated.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that as any woman business owner in any kind of industry, to be honest, one of the things that we always have to remember that men are usually pretty good at, and I'm not, again, it's usually, I'm adding that.
There's an asterisk there.
Yes. Is setting very good professional boundaries. And I think that that is something that, in my experience, a lot of women have a little bit of a harder time with, because we want to be nurturing, right? We want to help. We want to be like, oh my gosh, like I really need to help you out of this project mess that you got yourself into. And so when you actually begin to look at owning your own business, and whether that's a development company, or whether that is just a project management company, or just the rehab that you're doing, and you happen to be the owner and you happen to be a woman, setting up those boundaries ahead of time, right? And saying like, hey, like these situations, like I'm not going to put up with, or these things are not things that are okay interpersonally, not just between men and women. Like really, this is just not professional. And sort of standing your ground, and again, being kind about it and being professional about it, but really setting those boundaries and making sure that you're training the people around you that you have those boundaries, right? You want to say like, hey, no, you can't call me on Sunday at 6 a.m. about this project. Like that's not okay. Whether you're the owner or you're the consultant. So that's a little bit one thing that I would just say, boundaries are super important when you're doing your own stuff. They make things much better for everybody on projects. So that's one thing. The other thing is, for me, actually, and I just speak this for myself, the idea of the perfection, like if I don't have all of these things lined up, then I'm not going to be able to, I'm not qualified, or I don't belong in that space, or whatever. And I struggle with that still, where it's like, well, I haven't done this and I haven't done that, and so because of that, I don't belong here. That's not true. Like you'll meet plenty of people that haven't done X, Y, and Z and contribute amazingly into a certain community. Because we all have something to contribute. And so having that sort of understanding from day one to say like, hey, you know what, like maybe I haven't done these things. Maybe I didn't go to that school. Maybe I don't know the mayor, but you know what, I'm going to do this rehab and I'm going to rock it. Being a woman shouldn't never be like, oh, I can't go there. I can't show up to the job site because I'm a woman. That kind of fits into that category as well. Either, the things that you haven't accomplished or who you are just because of who you are. It really shouldn't hold you back from doing the things that you feel like you can do. And if you give them your best effort, there's no reason why, being a woman or not having a certain experience should limit you. It certainly doesn't limit a lot of people out there. And so that's kind of the other thing. And then I think finally, for me, not to make it sound like it's all roses. It's definitely hard in some instances. But I've gotten really lucky in that I've run into really good mentors, and they're all men, because obviously the industry has sort of the demographic that it has, and they've been fantastic. Most of them have become friends. They're people that I keep in touch with. They're people that I've brought business to after years, and so if you're able to lean on them and kind of call them and say, hey, look, like, I don't know how to deal with the situation, or they're really the people who are going to champion you. And so finding those mentors and having them close by is really pretty important. Finding kind of not only the mentors, just finding your tribe eventually, finding other women in the industry who are like kicking ass out there and just, leading mechanical companies and leading plumbing companies and, developing things themselves and having them as a nearby kind of support, but also a little bit of someone that you can look up to and say, hey, like they've done it. But it is certainly tough. I'll give you that. There's some instances where, there's situations where you want to make sure that you're very ready to say, you know what, I'm not going to play. Like that's the boundary. And to me, if you're able to really set those boundaries for yourself and that really goes back into like your self-worth and like all of these really big kind of sort of your emotional stability and making sure that your sugar isn't low right now because you haven't had lunch.
Yeah.
Like it really goes back to like being really good for yourself so that then you're able to establish those boundaries, so that then you're able to deal with those situations, because, development is really hard. You have a lot of unknowns, and it does add an extra layer that you're a woman, and so people sometimes react to you differently. But I think it's all, if you're able to say like, hey, these are my boundaries and this is my power and I'm going to go conquer the world. It brings us back to the conqueror.
Antonia the Conqueror. That's it.
Then you're able to like occupy those spaces and contribute, right? Because that I think is the part where a lot of women don't realize, but like we need your contribution, as an industry, and not because you're a woman. It's because of what's in your head and the ideas that you have. And if we're losing your contribution because you're a woman, I mean, how stupid is that? Right. So, that's kind of my bent, on it. But again, we could have an entire episode about the ridiculous, less than professional situations that I've been in that are super salacious and ridiculous.
I'm sure.
Probably like take up a pen name and write a book. But that's not to say that I'm going to quit, right? So, that's kind of how it is.
Everything you just said, like, yes. I love it all. Go back and re-listen to the last 6-7 minutes of this, what was just said. Pure gold. Love it.
I'm glad to hear that.
Love it. Well, no, absolutely. So thank you so much, Antonia, for sharing and coming on today. Any final thoughts before we let you out of here?
Just in that same vein, there's so much. It's such a place of abundance, to be honest. It's such a hustle, and not hustle in the bad way, but like it's such an amazing general way of doing business. Development has all of these amazing opportunities for all kinds of professionals, even for people who don't have a ton of experience in it. Getting involved in real estate development, like owning things, like we can't say that without saying Aisha's name, right? So, it's like owning things and understanding how your built environment works, and being a part of it, contributing it is just so wonderful. And I really think that this Twitter community that we have is amazing. And so, continuing to grow that, continuing to be a part of it, continuing to contribute is just such an honor. And it's really wonderful to, I'll tell anybody, if there's a way that you can get into owning things and into contributing to your neighborhood and to the people around you, that's just, that's what being a citizen, being around and being here, being alive, is for people like me. But then again, I grew up in development. So for me, like, it's just something I'm really passionate about. And if you have the means to do it and the interest, go for it.
Love it. Check out Antonia on Twitter. Check out her company, Mad Project. It was such a pleasure to have you on, Antonia. Looking forward to chatting again soon. Take care, Antonia.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm looking forward to being back at some point. We can chat about a bunch of other things.
Absolutely. Well, take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Awesome, everybody. That was our show. A big thank you to Antonia. I got tons of great actionable takeaways from that. Hopefully you did too, especially because I'm in the midst of a pretty significant development project. Antonia has been a really big help there. So go back, re-listen to the episode. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. Happy investing.